Execution will close a long and disturbing chapter that started with their throat slashings 12 years ago.
The crimes happened in the quiet Snohomish County community of Clearview, and many people there still fear Charles Campbell and have carefully watched the appeals process. Alan Schaffler has spent the evening in the town and can tell us more about the mood there tonight.
Well, we're in the Clearview Cafe, and it is a packed house. Now, as you might expect, at this time of night, a few rowdies in the bar. But most of the people here say this really isn't cause for celebration. It is more cause for relief. And they say they hope the execution of Charles Campbell, if in fact it does go through, is something that might provide some hope for the family and friends. Still, there is little question about where this town stands on capital punishment and Charles Campbell. Let's take a look now at some of the obvious signs from around the community earlier in the day. This is Clearview, and right across the street, or just next door to the cafe here, a sign saying, "Good night, Charles." An effigy hanging in a storefront. The time draweth nigh, 12:01 a.m. marked. Simple messages for a man who caused this community a lot of pain and has for the last 12 years thrown something of a shadow over this small Snohomish County community. Still, as we say, not a cause for celebration according to many here. They are not looking for revenge necessarily, but resolution and hopefully some relief. We're going to stay here right through 12:01 or right through whatever kind of resolution this night brings. We'll get back to you as events warrant up here. Reporting live in Clearview, I'm Alan Schaffler, King 5 News.
All right, Alan, thank you. Opponents of the death penalty are still rallying throughout the state. We showed you earlier pictures from St. Mark's Cathedral on Seattle's Capitol Hill. They promised to stay there until the execution is over.
And another group of death penalty opponents, as well as at least a few supporters, gathered on the steps of the state capitol tonight. They're hoping for a last-minute stay of execution, those who are opposed to the death penalty, that is. For an update now, here's King 5's Jim Foreman.
I think the mood here is one that folks here know that it is all just now a matter of minutes before the execution takes place, and that there is not much more they can do in fighting their cause against the death penalty. What they're here to really do is send a message that they don't want to see another execution in our state. Let's show you what the scene has been like here on the steps of the Capitol throughout the evening. About a dozen or so people opposed to the death penalty have been camped out here. They were here also during the hanging and the hours leading up of Wesley Allen Dodd. They are trying to get their message to the governor that they do not believe that the state of Washington should be carrying out capital punishment. They just don't think it works. They think it is unfair, and they want to find another way to carry out the execution of justice. On the other hand, there have been a few supporters of the death penalty here. They wanted to make sure that if the governor heard their message, that would be let the hanging take place, let this finally be resolved, and let's move on and try and find a way to stop violence before it happens. So that is the mood here. These people say they will be here through the execution time. One other note, we can tell you that even though it is unlikely anything will happen at the state Supreme Court, it's located just 100 yards or so from me. The lights are on, the building is open. We're told that at least one justice is prepared to take any action if it becomes necessary. So right now, everyone here in Olympia is just waiting. I'm Jim Foreman reporting live at the state capitol.
Jim, thanks, and he'll continue to monitor the situation there at the state capitol.
Well, we're nearing the final minutes before the scheduled time of execution. We're going to take you back to Walla Walla again and Dan Lothian, who can tell us more about the last minutes in a death row inmate's life.
Well, that's right, Gene. We'll tell you about those last minutes in just a few seconds, but we are standing in the fenced-in area where the folks are who are totally against the death penalty. Around 50 people are standing behind me. Most of them are with groups that are seeking to abolish the death penalty, some of them with church groups. They've been singing songs, they've been praying, and they've been giving sort of testimonials. They're quoting a lot of reports about criminals who've been on death row, then they've been released because they were found to be innocent. They've talked about innocent men who've been killed. They've talked about other countries that once had capital punishment, but they've done away with that. They're hoping that that will happen in this country and certainly here in this state. Now, as you mentioned, there are some last-minute things underway at this hour as we are just minutes away from the execution. Let's take a look at the last few minutes of what could be Charles Campbell's life.
No.
This is the so-called execution holding cell, steps away from the gallows, one floor above the lethal injection room. It is where Charles Campbell is spending the last few hours of his life, eating his last meal of fried fish and scalloped potatoes. He'll have access to a telephone. His attorney and a member of the clergy are the only last-minute visitors allowed. Up until the deadline, the Attorney General's office expects Campbell's legal team to be very busy.
And I'm certain that he will not leave any stone unturned, which may allow his client to avoid the death sentence in this case.
Barring any successful appeals, 20 minutes before the midnight hour, Campbell will be led to his choice of death to be executed, despite his objections and those of some public groups who say such punishment should be abolished.
The death penalty is always cruel and unusual.
He'll be led onto a trap door, given a chance to say some last words. A noose will be put around his neck, a hood placed over his head. His arms will be tied. The executioner will hit this button and the trap door will fall. A doctor will then check the body to pronounce him dead and the execution complete. More than a dozen people, execution witnesses, will watch from out here. 3 victims' family members, journalists, the Snohomish County prosecutor, and Campbell's attorney. If all goes as planned, they will witness the end of Campbell's life, more than 11 years after the triple murderer first went on death row.
Of course, I'm standing just a few feet away from around 50 people who really don't want to see that execution take place. Once again, I must point out that in no way do they support the crime that has taken place. They are against the crime, but they're also against the punishment. They don't think that Campbell's life should be taken. These folks will be out here until 1 minute past midnight if the execution does take place. If it is delayed, they will remain here until it does happen. Back to you.
Thank you, Dan Lothian, live in Walla Walla. It is now just about 5 minutes before midnight.
After Charles Campbell is executed, which is expected at 12:01, 9 other men will remain on our state's death row. Mitchell Roop was convicted on June 7, 1982. He killed 2 bank tellers in Tumwater and has actually spent more time on death row than Campbell. Patrick James Jeffries murdered a Port Angeles couple and was convicted in 1983. Brian Keith Lord got the death sentence in 1987. He beat a Paulsbo area teenager to death with a hammer. In Pierce County, Gary Michael Benn was convicted in 1990. His crimes, the murder of his half-brother and a close friend. Jonathan Gentry bludgeoned to death a 12-year-old girl in Bremerton, and he got the death sentence in 1991. At age 24, James Leroy Brett is the youngest inmate on our death row. He was 22 years old when a jury convicted him for shooting a man. And you might remember the conviction last summer of Sammy Lee Levine. He killed Carol Raymond Bond in Pierce County. Also last summer, Blake Richard Pirtle sentenced to death for murdering 2 people during a restaurant robbery in Spokane. At the most recent man sentenced to death in our state, Cal Coburn Brown. A King County jury convicted him in December for the rape, torture, stabbing, and strangulation of Holly Washa. Now, all of these inmates are still fighting their sentences with appeals.
These men may argue that they should not face execution, but an exclusive King 5 News poll shows the majority of people in Washington favor the death penalty. 69% of those surveyed want to keep it as is, with a choice between lethal injection or hanging. 13% favor the death penalty but not hanging. 11% oppose the death penalty altogether, and 7% have no opinion. Elway Research conducted the poll by surveying 450 registered voters. The margin of error is 4.8%.
We have several crews of reporters in Walla Walla now. And Jim Compton is with us here at the King 5 studios. And Jim, you were going to ask Linda Byron some questions. She's covering it from Walla Walla.
Right. I want to say that those numbers are very consistent with history. In 1975, the state voted on the death penalty. The numbers were 69 to 31% in favor of having the death penalty for aggravated murder. Linda, do you think that the key issue in the public